The grand chamber of the Valdari High Council had been designed to amplify the voice of authority. Its acoustic architecture curved to turn a whisper from the obsidian throne into a thunderclap that rolled over the boat heads of the subservient castes. Yet in this moment, the silence was so absolute, so suffocatingly heavy, that it felt as though the air itself had been transmuted into lead. High Counselor Thalric could hear the rhythmic, desperate pumping of his own hearts, a dual-beat staccato that seemed to mock the stillness of the room, and he gripped the edges of his podium until his chitinous knuckles turned a pale, sickly gray. Around him, the other members of the High Synod stood frozen, their bioluminescent markings dimmed to faint, terrified pulses of dull amber, their eyes fixed not on the Emperor, who sat slumped and withered upon the throne, but on the massive holographic projection that dominated the center of the chamber. It was a display of the Valdari home system, a complex web of orbital defenses, battle stations, and the pride of their civilization, the Grand Armada. But the display was wrong, fundamentally and horrifyingly incorrect, because where there should have been the vibrant, aggressive crimson icons of their 300 capital ships, there was only a chilling, static-filled void. The sensors were not malfunctioning. They were reporting the truth with a cold, mathematical precision that the Valdari mind refused to process. The fleet was not destroyed in the conventional sense. There were no debris clouds, no expanding spheres of superheated plasma, no radiation spikes indicative of antimatter containment breaches. Rather, the fleet had simply ceased to emit power, drifting like great metal corpses in the dark, their reactors cold, their weapons locked, their crews alive but imprisoned in coffins of their own making. Thalric looked up at Emperor Kael'thas, the warlord of the 7 sectors, the butcher of the Outer Rim, and saw for the first time in 400 cycles a creature stripped of its mythology, an old, frightened being staring into an abyss that had opened up in response to his own arrogance. It had been 3 standard days since the incident in the Zenthus Gap, 3 days since the Valdari forward cruisers had intercepted a convoy of unarmed, white-hulled vessels bearing the insignia of the Terran Coalition. Vessels that broadcasted universal codes of medical aid and disaster relief on all frequencies. The Terrans had hailed them, their voices calm, modulated, asking for passage to the plague-stricken worlds of the Rim, claiming they carried synthetic antibodies and terraforming stabilizers to halt the atmospheric rot consuming those colonies. But Kael'thas, blinded by the paranoia that is the inevitable disease of empires built on blood, had seen only a ruse. He had declared the white ships to be Trojan horses, vessels of spycraft and infiltration, and he had given the order that would now serve as the epitaph of his reign. Burn them, he had commanded, and the Valdari cruisers had unleashed a torrent of plasma and kinetic slugs, tearing through the unshielded hulls of the rescue convoy, scattering the medical supplies and the frozen bodies of human volunteers across the callous vacuum of space. The Terrans had not fired back. They had died transmitting codes of peace until the interference static swallowed their voices. And then, silence. For 2 days, there was only silence from the Terran border, a silence the Valdari propaganda machine had hailed as proof of human weakness, proof that the rescue convoy was indeed a cowardly probe that had been rightfully crushed. But then the sky above Valdaris Prime had changed. It happened slowly, not with the flash of warp-in signatures, but with the blocking of the stars. The sensors began to scream, not of multiple contacts, but of a singular, displacing mass that defied the logic of naval warfare. The Terran Retaliation had arrived, and it was not a fleet of skirmishers or a punitive raid. It was a total, overwhelming projection of force that seemed to warp the gravitational constants of the system. The holographic display finally updated, resolving the interference into a shape, and a collective gasp, wet and ragged, tore through the High Council. Hovering beyond the orbital ring was a vessel, if it could even be called that, of such magnitude that it cast a visible shadow upon the northern hemisphere of the planet, a monolithic slab of gunmetal gray that bristled with not turrets or missile tubes, but with massive, glowing arrays of electronic warfare projectors and gravity well generators. It was a siege world, a mobile fortress the size of a small moon, and it had simply appeared, bypassing the outer listening posts, ghosting through the sensor nets, and parking itself with the insolent ease of a predator entering a nursery. "They do not hail us," General Vruck growled, though his voice lacked its usual timbre of command. Trembling instead with the vibration of the floor as the massive ship above began to exert its gravitational influence on the tides of the planet below. They sit there. They block our sun. They deactivated the fleet with a pulse we cannot even analyze. What is this sorcery? Why do our weapons not fire? Vruk slammed a fist onto his console, but the screens remained dead, displaying only the looping message that had overridden every military frequency in the system. Pacification protocols active. This is impossible, Vruk muttered, his mandibles clicking in agitation. The Terrans are a trading species. They are soft. They send doctors to war zones. They preach ethics while we conquer systems. How can they possess this god machine? Thalric stepped forward, his robes of office heavy on his shoulders, feeling the weight of the truth he had tried to whisper before the order to fire was given. They are not soft, General, Thalric said, his voice cutting through the panic. They are restrained. There is a difference we have fatally misunderstood. He looked at the Emperor, whose eyes were glazed over. I warned the Council. I studied their history. The Terran Coalition does not build warships to conquer, they build them to end conflicts. We fired on a rescue convoy. We murdered their healers. In their culture there is no greater crime. We have not provoked a war, my lords. We have provoked a judgment. The Emperor shifted, his gaze snapping to Thalric with a flash of old anger. Judgment. We are the Valdari. We broke the Chitauri Federation. We enslaved the Silicon mines. We do not submit to judgment from primates who evolved on a dirt ball. He stood, shaky but defiant. If the fleet is down, use the planetary batteries. Fire the tectonic disruptors. I will not have this shadow hang over my world. You cannot fire. A new voice entered the chamber, not from the doorway, but from everywhere at once, resonating from the walls, the floor, the very bones of the listeners. It was a synthetic voice, translated perfectly into High Valdari, but carrying an undertone of organic warmth that made it terrifyingly intimate. The counselors spun around, reaching for sidearms that refused to unlock from their holsters. The holographic table flickered, the image of the Valdari system vanishing to be replaced by a simple, rotating emblem. A golden olive branch wrapped around a sword, the symbol of the Terran Coalition, but beneath it, the sword was unsheathed and dripping. Your systems are under our administrative control. Your power grid is ours. Your communications are ours. You have been placed under planetary quarantine. Show yourself, the Emperor screamed at the ceiling. Come down and fight like warriors. We are not here to fight, the voice replied, calm, devastatingly reasonable. Fighting implies a chance of victory for either side. We are here to dismantle the threat you pose to galactic stability. You fired on the Nightingale, a vessel designated for humanitarian aid under the Galactic Concordat, a treaty you signed and ignored. You killed 4,312 medical personnel and engineers. You destroyed supplies meant to save the Raman colonies from viral extinction. The retaliation for this act is not war, it is correction. The atmosphere in the room shifted from panic to a surreal dread. The concept of correction from a species they had deemed inferior was a psychological blow harder than any kinetic bombardment. Thalric watched the screens as new data began to flow, not from their own sensors but feeds provided by the Terrans. They showed the surface of the Valdari capital city. The streets were not filled with fire, there were no explosions. Instead, massive dropships were descending, silent and sleek, landing in the public squares. But out of them marched not soldiers in power armor, but machines, tall bipedal automatons of gleaming white and chrome, unarmed but moving with absolute purpose. They were dismantling the statues of the Emperor. They were welding the doors of the armories shut. They were setting up distribution centers for food and energy, bypassing the Valdari government entirely. You are annexing us? General Vruk gasped, watching the humiliation of his empire unfold in high definition. We are ignoring you, the voice corrected. We are removing your relevance. Your military is neutralized. Your government is suspended. We are assuming direct stewardship of the Valdari populace until such time as a governance structure compatible with civilized existence can be established. We are not conquering your land. We are confiscating your keys. The insult was so profound that the Emperor collapsed back into his throne, clutching his chest. To be conquered was a fate a warrior could understand. To be treated like an unruly child, to have one's toys taken away and one's authority simply bypassed, was a dismantling of the Valdari soul. But Thalric knew this was only the beginning. He knew, from the obscure texts he had read about the Terran psychological doctrines, that the total retaliation was not just about disarmament. It was about exposing the rot at the core of the aggressor. You cannot simply govern us. Thalric spoke up, addressing the air, hoping the invisible entities listening would recognize a voice of reason. Our culture is built on hierarchy, on strength. If you strip the Emperor of power, chaos will consume the streets. The clans will turn on each other. You will cause a civil war that will kill millions. We have anticipated this, the voice replied. The Archangel protocols are in effect. We are broadcasting the truth of the Zenthus Gap incident to every screen, every datapad, every neural implant in your empire. Your people are watching the footage of your cruisers firing on unarmed ships. They are hearing the screams of the Terran nurses. They are seeing the supplies that would have saved their trading partners burning in the void. You believe your people follow you out of loyalty, High Counselor. We believe they follow you out of a manufactured ignorance. We are removing the blindfold. A chill ran down Thalric's spine. This was the weapon, not the massive ship above, not the electronic virus that locked their guns. The weapon was truth, weaponized and deployed with surgical precision. The Terrans were not just defeating the Valdari military, they were assassinating the Valdari narrative. Suddenly, the great doors of the council chamber groaned. They were made of blast-proof durasteel, secured by genetic locks, but they began to slide open, the mechanisms grinding in protest as they were overridden. A silence even deeper than before fell upon the room. Through the opening walked three figures. They were small compared to the towering Valdari, lacking the natural armor and claws, clad in simple, vacuum-sealed suits of dark blue fabric with no visible armor plating. Their faces were exposed, soft, pale skin flushed with the oxygen mix of the room. The one in the center, a woman with graying hair and eyes that held the cold clarity of a glacial lake, stepped forward. She carried no weapon, only a datapad. She walked past the guards, who stood frozen by the paralysis of their powered armor suits, and stopped at the foot of the dais. She looked up at the Emperor, not with hatred, but with a profound disappointment. "I am Admiral Holloway," she said, her voice unamplified but carrying clearly in the acoustics of the room. "I commanded the convoy you destroyed." The Emperor snarled, a low, guttural sound. "You came to gloat, human. You use your trickery to bind us, and then you come to mock the strong." "Strong," Holloway repeated the word, tasting it, finding it rancid. "You fired plasma torpedoes at a ship carrying incubators. You incinerated 300 pediatric stasis pods. You call that strength? That is the flailing panic of a coward." She tapped her datapad, and the holographic table shifted again. This time it showed a live feed of the Valdari streets. The people were not rioting. They were standing still, watching the screens that the Terrans had hijacked. They were seeing the footage of the massacre. And they were seeing the Terran dropships deploying food, medical aid, and energy cells to the poorer districts that the Emperor had neglected for decades to fund his war machine. "We are not here to gloat. We are here to conduct a trial." "By whose authority?" Thalric asked, stepping down from his podium, drawn by the sheer gravitational pull of the woman's presence. "The Galactic Council has no jurisdiction in Valdari space." "By the authority of the victims," Holloway said, turning her gaze to Thalric, "and by the laws of physics which you have so grossly abused. Do you know why we were in the Zenthus Gap? Do you know why we risked a rescue convoy so close to your borders?" "To spy," Ruck spat. "To play sensors." Holloway shook her head, a slow, mournful gesture. "Because we detected the emission signatures of a K-class stellar instability in your own sun, a rot in the core of your star caused by your reckless harvesting of solar plasma for your fleet. Your sun is dying, Valdari. We were bringing the stabilizers to fix it. We were not going to the rim. We were coming here to save you." The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. The Emperor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Thalric felt his knees give way, and he slumped against the railing. The irony was so absolute, so crushing, that it bordered on madness. They had murdered the very people coming to prevent their extinction. You lie," the Emperor whispered, but the conviction was gone. "We do not lie about math," Holloway said. She gestured to the screen, and the data stream changed to astrophysical schematics, undeniably Valdari in origin but processed by Terran clarity. The core instability was there, a growing cancer in their star, ignored by a government too obsessed with expansion to look at its own foundation. The rescue convoy was a cover, yes, but not for war. It was a cover to save your pride. We wanted to repair your star without you knowing how close you came to the end so you wouldn't feel indebted to us. We tried to save you with dignity. You responded with slaughter." Holloway stepped closer, her eyes blazing now. "So now we do it the other way. The total retaliation is this: we will fix your star, we will heal your people, we will rebuild your infrastructure, and you will watch. You will sit in this room, stripped of your power, and you will watch as the weak humans save the empire you were too strong to protect. We will force you to survive, and that will be your punishment. to live with the knowledge that your survival is a charity from the people you murdered. The cruelty of the mercy was breathtaking. Thalric looked at the human admiral and realized that the Valdari had never understood warfare. The Valdari fought to destroy bodies. The Terrans fought to dismantle souls. By saving them, they were destroying the Valdari identity of supremacy forever. It was a fate worse than death for the Emperor, who was now weeping openly, a broken old thing on a throne that meant nothing. But the story did not end in that room. The narrative of the universe is rarely so contained. As Holloway stood there, the arbiter of a civilization's fate, a red alert chimed on her wrist comp. It was a sound that cut through the diplomatic heaviness, a sharp, urgent tone that Thalric recognized from the universal lexicon of emergency. Holloway looked at her wrist and her expression changed. The mask of the judge fell away, replaced by the alertness of the soldier. She tapped her comms. "Holloway here, report." "Admiral," a voice crackled over the open channel, audible to the entire room. "Deep-range sensors on the Everest have picked up a signal. Sector 9, the emptiness beyond the rim." "Is it Valdari remnants?" Holloway asked, glancing at General Vruck. "No, Admiral, it's the signal we've been listening for, the echo, it's awake." The color drained from Holloway's face. For the first time, the human looked afraid. Not the political fear of the Valdari, but a primal, existential dread. She looked up at the Emperor, then at Thalric, and the animosity vanished, replaced by a sudden, desperate calculation. "Sector 9, Thalric whispered. "That is the dead zone, the graveyard of the Ancient Ones." Holloway ignored the protocol. She stepped up to the holographic table and keyed in a code that overrode the Valdari system completely, linking it to the Terran sensor net. The room plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the display. At the edge of the galaxy, in the darkness beyond the Valdari borders, a tear had opened in the fabric of space. It was not a warp gate, it was a wound. And pouring out of it were not ships, but biological horrors, vast swarms of chitin and shadow that eclipsed the stars they passed. "The firing on the convoy," Holloway said, her voice low, speaking to herself. "The energy signature of your plasma bombardment. It resonated, it rang the bell." "What is that?" the Emperor asked, his voice trembling, the petty politics of the last hour forgotten in the face of this new monstrosity. "The reason we have a fleet this size," Holloway said, turning to address the Valdari Council, her eyes hard. "The reason we built the Archangel protocols, the reason we try to stabilize civilizations instead of conquering them. We knew something was out there, something that eats stars. We call them the Void Eaters, and your attack on us. The energy release. It woke them up." The silence returned, but it was different now. It was not the silence of judgment, but the silence of the prey realizing the predator has entered the clearing. The Valdari fleet was disabled. The Terran fleet was positioned for occupation, not defense, and the swarm was moving fast. "Unlock our ships," General Vruck said, standing up. It was not a demand, but a plea. "Admiral, if that thing is coming, you need our guns, you need our ships." Holloway looked at the general, then at the Emperor. She saw the fear, but she also saw the martial instinct reawakening. The Valdari were brutal, arrogant, and cruel, but they were warriors. And against a threat that consumed stars, morality was a luxury. "I can't unlock your systems," Holloway said. "The virus effectively bricked your targeting computers. It would take weeks to purge." "Then give us yours," Thalric said. The audacity of the suggestion hung in the air. "Link your fire control to our hulls, use our ships as drones. We will pilot them manually if we must, but do not leave us defenseless." Holloway paused. The decision she was about to make would violate every directive of the Terran coalition. To arm a hostile power, to integrate their systems with the aggressor she had just conquered. But she looked. At the screen, at the swarm devouring the light of the distant stars. "This is not a retaliation anymore," Holloway said. "This is an integration." She tapped her comms. "Command, this is Holloway. Initiate protocol, Aegis. Upload Terran fire control software to the Valdari fleet. Grant slaved access to their bridge crews. We are going to need a bigger line." "Admiral," the voice on the comms hesitated. "You are authorizing the rearming of the Valdari Imperium." "No," Holloway said, looking Thalric in the eye. "I am authorizing the conscription of the Valdari Imperium. They wanted a fight. They just got the biggest one in history." The next 12 hours were a blur of impossible cooperation. Terran engineers, still wearing the uniforms of the fleet that had blockaded the planet, boarded Valdari warships, carrying interface cables and software patches. Valdari crews, confused and humbled, worked side by side with the humans, bypassing their own fried circuits to install Terran targeting matrices. The hatred was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was suppressed by the sheer scale of the incoming threat. The enemy of my enemy is my weapon. As the Void-Eater swarm approached the Valdari system, a tide of darkness that blotted out the nebulae, the combined fleet formed a line. The massive Terran siege world, the Everest, sat at the center, a bastion of iron will. Flanking it were the 300 crimson ships of the Valdari, their reactors pushed to critical levels, their weapons now guided by the cold, precise logic of Terran AI. Fleet readiness at 98%, Thalric reported from the bridge of the Valdari flagship, the Crimson Talon. He was wearing a Terran headset over his cranial ridges. Admiral Holloway, the swarm is entering weapons range. Hold fire, Holloway's voice came through, calm as a frozen sea. Let them cluster, we need a saturation kill. The swarm was a nightmare made manifest. Biological ships the size of cities, pulsing with purple veins of bioelectricity, screeched silently through the void. They ignored the ships at first, heading straight for the dying sun of the Valdari, drawn to the instability like moths to a flame. They smell the rot, Holloway said. They feed on dying stars, that's why they're here. Then we defend the sun, the Emperor said. He was on the bridge of the Talon as well, stripped of his regalia, wearing a simple flight suit. He looked younger, energized by a purpose that wasn't born of greed. For Valdaris. For the galaxy, Holloway corrected. All ships target the central mass, Solution Alpha 9, fire. The darkness of space was shattered. The Valdari ships, known for their reckless, chaotic fire, unleashed a volley of unprecedented precision. Terran targeting algorithms guided the Valdari plasma torpedoes into a synchronized web of destruction. At the same moment, the Everest opened fire, its main batteries launching relativistic kinetic slugs that punched through the biological hulls of the Void-Eaters, shattering them into frozen mist. The battle was not a skirmish, it was a meat grinder. The Valdari fought with a ferocity that terrified even the human observers. They rammed their damaged cruisers into the maws of the Void-Eaters, detonating their cores. They screened the Terran carriers, taking hits meant for the human ships. In turn, the Terrans used their electronic warfare suites to scramble the hive-mind signals of the swarm, causing the biological ships to turn on each other. It was a symphony of violence, conducted by two species that were polar opposites. The Terrans provided the sheet music, the Valdari played the instruments until they broke. For 6 hours, the battle raged. The sky of Valdaris burned with the light of dying ships and exploding monsters. Debris rained down on the capital, scarring the palaces, but no one looked away. The people of Valdaris, watching the screens, saw something they had never seen before. Terran shuttles swooping in to rescue Valdari escape pods. They saw human point defense grids shooting down spores that would have infected the Valdari ships. They saw the weak, humans bleeding and dying to protect the strong Valdari. And in the final moment, as the alpha beast of the swarm, a creature the size of a moon, bore down on the Everest, preparing to unleash a bioelectric scream that would liquefy the human crew, it was the Emperor's flagship that intervened. "Witness me," Kael'thas roared over the channel. The Crimson Talon, leaking atmosphere and burning from a dozen breaches, accelerated. It did not fire, it simply became a kinetic missile. "Emperor, no," Thalric shouted, but he was already being shoved into an escape pod by the Royal Guard. "The debt is paid," Kael'thas shouted. The Talon slammed into the open maw of the Alpha Beast. The impact was catastrophic. The Valdari flagship's antimatter core detonated inside the creature. The explosion was a miniature supernova. It vaporized the Alpha Bios, T and the center of the swarm. The shockwaves scattered the remaining Void-Eaters, breaking their cohesion. Without the hive mind, they were just animals, confused and terrified. The Terran fleet, led by the Everest, mopped them up with ruthless efficiency. Silence returned to the Zenthis Gap, but it was not the heavy, fearful silence of the council chamber. It was the exhausted, smoking silence of a battlefield where the living look around and realize they are still breathing. Thalric's escape pod was recovered by a Terran shuttle. He was brought to the Everest. He walked onto the bridge, his uniform torn, his arm in a sling. He found Admiral Holloway staring out at the view screen, where the Valdari sun still burned, though it flickered ominously. "The swarm is gone," Holloway said, not turning around. "For now, they will return, maybe in a year, maybe in a century." "We will be ready," Thalric said. He stood beside her. He looked at the human woman, this creature of logic and mercy, and he felt a strange sensation. Respect. Not the fear-based respect of his people, but something deeper. "Your emperor died well," Holloway said softly. "He died of Valdari," Thalric replied, "but he died saving a Terran ship." "And the Terran ships are deploying the solar stabilizers now," Holloway said. "We are fixing your son. The process will take 50 years. You will need to rebuild your fleet. You will need to rebuild your government." "We cannot go back to what we were," Thalric said. "The people they saw you save us. They saw the Emperor sacrifice himself not for conquest, but for survival. The myth of our supremacy is dead." "Good," Holloway turned to face him. "Myths are heavy. They drag you down. Replace it with something lighter, like partnership." She extended a hand. It was a human gesture, strange to the Valdari, but Thalric knew what it meant. He looked at his own clawed hand, then at hers. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and clasped it. "The rescue convoy," Thalric murmured. "You said you came to save us from the sun. You ended up saving us from ourselves." "That's the thing about rescue missions," Holloway said, a tired smile touching her lips. "You never know who's really being rescued." The total retaliation was complete. The Terrans had destroyed the Valdari Empire, not by burning its cities, but by burning away its illusions. And from the ashes, something new was rising. Something forged in the fires of a cosmic war, tempered by the memory of a massacre, and bound by a blood debt that would last for generations. The Valdari and the Terrans stood together on the bridge of the Everest, watching the repair drones swarm around the wounded sun, stitching the light back together, one beam at a time. The galaxy was dark and full of terrors, but as Thalric looked at the human fleet, he realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of the dark. He knew that when the monsters came back, the white ships would be there. And next time, the Valdari would not fire on them. Next time, they would fly beside them. The great game of empires had ended. The war for survival had begun. And humanity, the unassuming architects of the Retaliation, had just recruited their fiercest protectors. The weeks that followed the Battle of the Zenthis Gap were a period of societal vertigo for the Valdari population. The cognitive dissonance was almost physically painful. For generations, the Valdari caste system had been reinforced by a simple, brutal truth. We are the apex. We take, we conquer, we rule. To be weak is to be food. To be merciful is to be foolish. And yet the screens in every city square, every transit hub, and every home continued to play the footage that dismantled this worldview. They saw the Terran engineers, clad in their utilitarian orange void suits, floating in the microgravity of the orbital shipyards, welding Valdari hulls back together. They saw human medical frigates docking with the orbital habitats, dispensing gene therapies that cured the radiation sickness plaguing the lower castes. Sicknesses the Emperor had declared necessary sacrifices for industrial output. Thalric, now the acting regent of the Valdari Provisional Council, walked through the ruins of the Imperial Palace. The Archangel protocols were still active, but their nature had changed. They were no longer a digital siege, they were a digital infrastructure. The Terran AI, which identified itself as Athena, was effectively running the logistics of the entire Valdari system. It routed food to the starving, energy to the blacked-out sectors, and information to the ignorant. He found Admiral Holloway in what used to be the war room. The holographic table was still there, but the ominous red icons of invasion were gone, replaced by the soothing blue and green metrics of reconstruction. Holloway was arguing with a hologram of a Terran politician, a man in a sharp suit who looked displeased. "The Senate is up in arms, Elizabeth," the politician was saying. "You were sent to neutralize a threat, not to adopt a pet empire. The cost of the solar stabilization alone is 3 trillion credits. And now you're authorizing technology transfers? We're giving fleet-grade shielding tech to the people who shot up the Nightingale." Holloway didn't flinch. She leaned over the table, her posture exhausted but unyielding. "Senator, we didn't neutralize a threat. We discovered a bulwark. You saw the sensor logs of the Void Eaters. You know what the simulations say. If the Valdari had fallen, that swarm would have hit the Centauri sector in 6 months. We would have lost 3 colonies. The Valdari held the line. They died holding the line. We are not giving them tech. We are rearming the front line." "The public won't see it that way," the senator countered. "They see the butchers of the Nightingale getting a reward." "Then show them the footage of the Crimson Talon," Holloway snapped. "Show them Emperor Kael'thas ramming a moon-sized bug to save the Everest. The debt is paid in blood, Senator. Now we pay ours in steel. Holloway out. She cut the feed and rubbed her temples. She didn't notice Thalric standing in the shadows until he stepped forward. Your leaders are unhappy, Thalric observed. Holloway jumped slightly, then sighed. Politicians are always unhappy, Regent. They like clean wars. They like mission-accomplished banners. They don't like complexity. They don't like the idea that the bad guys can become the good guys if you give them a chance. Are we the good guys now? Thalric asked, moving to the table. He looked at the schematic of his home world. It looked fragile. You're the guys who are alive, Holloway said. That's a start. Goodness is a habit, Thalric. You have to practice it. She tapped the console. We found something else, by the way, in the wreckage of the Void Eaters, the biological ships. They weren't just animals. They had cybernetics integrated into their nervous systems. Old tech, very old. Thalric frowned. You imply they were engineered. I imply they were a weapon, Holloway said grimly. Someone sent them, the signal that woke them up. It was a trigger, but the gun was loaded a long time ago. The Valdari sector is the gate, Thalric. Whoever built those things, they built them to breach this specific region of space. Your empire has been sitting on a trapdoor for 1,000 years. Thalric felt a chill. The Valdari had always believed they were the masters of their domain, exploring the stars, conquering the weak. The idea that they were merely squatters on a minefield was humbling. What do we do? Thalric asked. It was a question no Valdari leader would have asked a month ago. They would have barked a command. We fortify, Holloway said. The total retaliation part of my orders gave me wide latitude to ensure the safety of the coalition. I am interpreting that as the creation of a joint defense zone. I want to build a citadel station in orbit of your sun. A joint command post. Terran sensors, Valdari armor. We train your crews in electronic warfare. You train our marines in boarding actions. We combine our strengths. A marriage of convenience, Thalric mused. A marriage of survival, Holloway corrected. There is one condition, however. Thalric stiffened. Name it. The caste system ends, Holloway said. Her voice was quiet but immovable. We cannot integrate our forces if half your population is treated like livestock. We need engineers, not slaves. We need thinkers, not drones. If you want Terran shields on your ships, the crew operating them must be free. All of them. Thalric looked at her. He thought of the centuries of tradition, the rigid social strata that defined Valdari life. To dismantle it would be to destroy the very fabric of their culture. But then he thought of the Void Eaters. He thought of the silence in the council chamber. He thought of the white ships burning in the dark. It will cause unrest, Thalric said. The Highborn will resist. Let them resist, Holloway said. Athena controls their bank accounts. I think you'll find their resistance manageable. Besides, the lower castes are the ones who fixed the ships during the battle. They earned their citizenship. Thalric nodded slowly. You are a dangerous conqueror, Admiral. You invade us, you disarm us, you save us, and now you restructure our society. Is there anything left of the Valdari? Your courage, Holloway said, and your honor, we're just polishing off the rust. The weeks turned into months. The transformation of Valdaris was painful, chaotic, and beautiful. There were riots, of course. The old guard did not go quietly. But when the Terran peacekeepers stood side by side with the newly liberated Valdari militia, the rebellions fizzled out. The food distribution centers became schools. The armories became factories. The first joint maneuver was held 6 months after the arrival of Th. E. Everest, a squadron of Valdari frigates, painted in the new colors of the Alliance, gunmetal gray and deep crimson, flew in formation with a Terran carrier group. They executed a complex warp-jump synchronization, a maneuver that required absolute trust between the navigators of both species. It was flawless. Thalric stood on the observation deck of the new Citadel station, a massive construct orbiting the healing sun. Beside him stood Admiral Holloway. They watched the ships dance in the void. It's beautiful, Thalric admitted. It's necessary, Holloway replied. She handed him a data pad. Report from Deep-Range Surveillance, Sector 9. Thalric took the pad. The data was dense, but the conclusion was clear. The tear in space hadn't closed, it was widening. And through the static, a signal was coming through. It wasn't the mindless screech of the Void Eaters. It was a structured transmission, a language. They are hailing us, Thalric said. They are taunting us, Holloway corrected. Translation matrix suggests the message is, the garden is ripe, the harvest begins. The Void Eaters were just the locusts, Thalric realized, his blood running cold. The farmers are coming. Yes, Holloway said. She looked out at the fleet. Human and alien, logic and fury united by a mistake that became a miracle. But this time we're not a rescue convoy, and we're not a lone empire. She turned to Thalric, and for the first time he saw a predatory glint in her eyes that matched the fiercest Valdari warlord. This time, Holloway smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression. We are the Retaliation. The alarms on the station began to blare, not a sound of panic, but a call to arms. Across the system, thousands of engines flared to life. The Valdari roared their challenges over the comms, and the Terrans broadcast their tactical grids. Thalric looked at the encroaching dark, then at the woman beside him. He adjusted his sash of office, straightened his spine, and keyed the fleet-wide channel. All ships, Thalric's voice boomed, amplified by Terran tech, resonating with the strength of two civilizations. This is High Counselor Thalric. The enemy approaches. They believe we are weak. They believe we are divided. They believe we are food. He paused, letting the silence hold for a heartbeat. Show them why they should have stayed in the dark, weapons free. The combined fleet of the Terran-Valdari alliance surged forward, a spear of light thrown into the endless night, ready to meet the end of the world with a roar of defiance that would shake the stars themselves. The mistake of the Zenthus gap had been forgiven, but the lesson remained. Do not fire on the white ships, for behind them comes the storm. And the storm was no longer just Terran, it was us.